conference, please join me in welcoming the proposer of motion number 3 on Grangemouth, our champion, Scotland's champion, Kenny MacAskill MP.
Thank you. I think this is an amalgam between the Deputy Leader's address that I update you on and a specific resolution on Grangemouth. Let me start with some preamble about what I have been doing in the role of Deputy Leader. As has always been my belief in politics throughout my involvement in it, you start by meeting with members and activists, with campaign groups, with trade unions and indeed with business. Sadly, it seems to be something that the Scottish Government has forgotten. I was recently speaking to a campaign group in the North East. The MSP representing the area and a government minister might disagree with them, but I've always thought you should at least do them the courtesy of engaging with them. Worse than that, I was speaking to the Scottish Secretary of Unite. We were discussing the need to save Grangemouth, and he told me he'd sought a meeting with the then Business and Energy Secretary. She could spare half an hour in 3 weeks. That is not just insulting to Scotland's largest trade union and to one of our major industrial bases. It's insulting to the people of Scotland. But the Scottish Government seemed to be following in the lap of Labour in their arrogance and aloofness, because I was recently speaking to the Chief Executive of Scotland's largest airport. They haven't had any engagement with the Scottish Government for some several years now. Connectivity is important when you're an island nation, and that's why Neil, myself and Ash, we continually network, meet and engage with members, with people, with organisations and indeed with business. It's essential. The two areas, and indeed in the clips you've seen that, I continue to focus on are energy and indeed the situation in Gaza. Let me briefly touch on both. It's the energy, not just, as I'll come on to in Grangemouth, but in all its facets. There is to be a debate in Parliament next week on hydrogen. I'll be participating in that. It does offer huge opportunities for Scotland. I've seen an announcement for INEOS in Grangemouth, and that's something to be welcomed. We've also got announcements in my own patch in East Lothian as the whisky sector seeks to decarbonise. Hydrogen is a good thing. The electricity supply operator tell me 100% of UK green hydrogen is anticipated to come from Scotland. 100%. So it's a great opportunity. It's also a great resource. But as well as making sure we get some revenue for it, let's also join the dots, because in the debate coming up, I'll be making the point that we have, from speaking to the experts, we have a surfeit of hydrogen being produced in some of these plants. So what do you do with it? Well, I know from speaking to a pal who used to be the director of Lothian buses that they actually prefer hydrogen buses to electric buses. They start the buses at 6 in the morning, they don't turn them off until 12 at night, they don't want parked up recharging for 2 or 3 hours. Never mind, he also anecdotally told me that if they recharged every electric bus at Annandale bus station, those of you from Edinburgh, nobody in Leith would be able to boil a kettle. So there's good reason that you can consider hydrogen buses. Huge opportunities in East Lothian and all throughout Scotland. And do you know what? Who manufactures hydrogen buses? Alexander Dennis Limited in Falkirk. It's not rocket science to join the dots, to produce green hydrogen, to manufacture hydrogen buses, to sell them abroad and to provide cheap, available public transport for your people. The genocide in Gaza continues, and that is what it is. I won't seek to impede upon a debate that we're going to have in a motion, but I will just make some points about the points I've been raising in Parliament, because I am fed up with the pusillanimous response of the British Government to the false equivocation that we see on the media in this country. This is not a situation of just an overzealous response by the State of Israel to the dreadful incidents that happened on the 7th of October. Everybody condemns that and seeks the return of those who have been abducted and taken hostage. But Israel is now operating to a plan to make Gaza unlivable. And if the consequence of that is to extirpate the Palestinian people, then Netanyahu is intent on doing so. That requires to be called out. But more importantly, I will continue to challenge in the chamber the failure to address the UK's complicity. Because believe you me, this war might not be in our name, but our fingerprints are all over it. The UK is supplying arms. The British military is providing intelligence. The UK is facilitating US and Israeli air bases and air traffic going from RAF Arcatiri. This is not what the people of Scotland want. It's why we need independence. So as in President Higgins in Ireland, we can not only demand a ceasefire, but we can also demand justice for the Palestinian people. Let me move on to the substantial resolution. I was in Loch Gelly, I think it was in 1989. There was a big rally in this very auditorium. I wasn't speaking. It was Tommy Sheridan. It was Dick Douglas. It was an anti-poll tax rally. Things were fraught. We wondered in the SNP if we could even get 100,000 non-payers. But the people of Scotland realised just how wrong, invidious and wicked the poll tax was. They were mobilised politically. The people of Scotland stood up, didn't pay, and we brought down the Iron Lady. We need to remember that no matter how hard the challenge, if you don't stand and fight, you'll never succeed. And if you don't stand and fight, you won't be able to walk with your head held high, even if you should lose. It is 40 years on from the miners' strike. It's decades on from the closure of Ravenscraig. But the closure of Grangemouth refinery is the big one for our age. It goes to the heart of whether we seek to be an industrial and manufacturing nation, or whether we're just going to allow it to close, as perhaps might happen with Ferguson Marine, the last shipyard on the Lower Clyde. It's just another chapter of Scotland's history. It's 100 years since Grangemouth refinery first opened. Are we just going to become a retiral home for old people to move here because they like the quality of life, and a giant transmission station for the energy that's being produced on and off our shores? Or are we going to make a stand about the nation we have been, the nation we can be, and the nation we must be? There are two aspects to this. It is core to our industrial base. Without it, we simply become a developing nation. They take your resource, they buy it for cheap, at a discount, and they sell it back to you at a premium. It's going to make us the only major oil-producing nation of the 25 major oil-producing nations that does not have a refinery capacity. We will be akin to the Republic of Congo and to Trinidad and Tobago, who produce less oil than we do, but also, as with us, we face a lack of refinery capacity. I mean no disrespect to those countries, but Scotland, as an oil-producing nation, requires a refinery capacity, because the loss of its effect is calamitous. It's a loss of jobs which are significant. It's a loss of skills which are even more so. Where's the new skilled workforce to be found? It's hard enough sometimes in Scotland to find a plumber, never mind find a mechanical engineer or a petroleum engineer. But young laddies and lassies have to start somewhere. And even when I left the school, many went to what was then BP, ICI. They require Petro Ineos to get a skill, and we require them to be able to be skilled. But it's also about a just transition. If that's to mean anything and not just to be a glib phrase, then it can't just be closing down the North Sea as some would have, deliberately at the position of the Greens or just covertly in terms of taxation policy from the Labour Party. We require to continue to produce oil to be able to transition. We require it because in renewable technology, in the turbines on and off our shores, you require plastics. That doesn't come from renewable technology, it currently comes from the oil that we extract in the North Sea. So if we are to get these turbines, then we're required to continue production in the North Sea for the plastics, for the diesels to take the turbines and the columns out into the Forth and indeed in other estuaries, and indeed the trucks that take the turbines up onto the hills. Simply to just stop oil means just stopping renewables. It just doesn't work. That's why this fight is important. That's why we need to, as I say, maintain industrial nation status so that we can have a new future. It's as the unions say, extend, invest, transition. The plant is profitable. It does make money. The hydrocracker has restarted. If needs be, if it falters, then it has to be financially supported. The British government is putting €600 million into an INEOS plant in Antwerp. It will create no jobs in Scotland, and it will provide a lot of money, no doubt, for financiers and perhaps for some service industries south of the border, but it won't benefit our manufacturing base. And at the same time, they say they've no money for Grangemouth, but they've certainly money to fund BMW to come in and support a battery plant again south of the border. So the arguments for retention of Grangemouth are clear. It's economically disastrous to close it, throwing thousands of people into unemployment across not just Grangemouth, but the Forth Valley and central Scotland. It's environmentally foolish. There are already 600 ship movements on the River Forth related to Grangemouth, bringing oil in or taking it out. There were 2 tankers part of Dunbar when I was walking around the harbour last night. If you stop refining and you actually have to export everything to be refined and then bring it back in to store it before you transmit it around Scotland, it won't be 600 ship movements in and out. And if people think there's issues with the environmental aspects of a refinery, believe you me, thousands upon thousands of these ships spewing diesel, not just on the Forth, but on the Clyde, is much, much worse. And it's also about energy security, because we well know, and the Herald highlighted it just last week, Russian oil is flooding into this country. It's being refined in India, it's being branded as Indian, and it's being imported. This is a situation when many in the UK government and indeed opposition benches are talking about potential war, something I'll continue to oppose. As I said earlier, the last thing our humanity and globe needs is a rush to World War III. But there are sanctions imposed upon Russia. Maybe, just maybe, they should be imposing those sanctions dealing with those who are importing Russian oil branded and refined in India and not closing Grangemouth refinery. Energy security matters now, and energy security will matter in years to come. That's why we've been running our campaign. That's why we've been working with the unions and with the shop stewards. No other party is doing similar. We need to mobilise, though, not just, as I say, individuals, but mobilise across the country, because this is Scotland's resource. It is our only refinery, and it must be retained. It's why, after discussion with the shop stewards, I've decided to seek the Alba candidature for Grangemouth, Alba. I want to make sure that this is not just the beating industrial heart of Scotland, but the centre of Alba's election campaign. Nothing makes the case for independence more than being energy rich, yet your people fuel poor. Oil and renewable rich, yet a country that's been turned into a giant transmission station of which there are fewer jobs, with revenue missing, jobs absent, and businesses nowhere. It will be for the Lacus in Clickmannon and in Falkirk to decide, but I would be honoured if they were to select me. But let me also say to those who might say, this isn't an Alba seat. The days of fiefdoms, Labour, SNP or anybody else in Scotland are long gone. The decision is for the local branch members, and the decision ultimately for the Member of Parliament is for the electorate in Grangemouth and Alba. I will work with the shop stewards as I've been working with Unite the Union. And I also note with interest, you might have seen it in the paper last week, Grangemouth and Alba is one of the areas in Scotland where Unite are paying for a billboard advertisement that challenges Labour on their energy policy, because Unite, like the RMT, who we know well in this party and work closely with, are well aware there is no just transition under the Tories, and there's no just transition coming under Starmer's Labour. So that's why I seek that nomination, to put it at the heart of not just the campaign that will be run in Grangemouth and Alba, but across the country. Because I've said nothing makes a case for independence more than the situation, the absurdity and the perversity that we find ourselves in, when every estuary and forth in Scotland should be riveting, banging and building turbines, there's very few and very little noise being made. When every area should be seeing supply chain jobs, more or similar to my own part in East Lothian, where a transmission station being built that will take the energy south and that will ultimately provide 4 full-time jobs, with a battery storage site being constructed that will be as ugly as sin and that will create no jobs other than some landscaping jobs, which in reality mean some grass cutting around a huge fence hiding container terminals that will be taking the energy once again south. It is simply unacceptable. We discovered oil and should be as wealthy as the Norwegians. We are now getting a second bounty and a second opportunity with renewables. We must ensure that we don't become a giant transmission station where we have no revenue, where we have no jobs, and where we're getting no businesses locating here, and where we have the added perversity that we are energy rich and that the majority of our people are going to be left in fuel poverty. That's why I seek your support for this resolution. It's why I seek the support of Grangemouth and Alba in the coming election.